Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
So, Keith, we're going to roll right into kind of role delineation and, talk about the difference between sales and technical, just kind of like at a top level. And I know, you have a ton of experience going back to your PTC days, but over the years, and Johnny, I'd like you to chime in on this, like the general role of a technical resource, kind of like when you think about that, what are some of kind of like the key activities and the key, the things that you would see? We're going to talk about the differences between that and the sellers, because sometimes I think it gets a little cross sometimes. So let's start with the technical resource.
Yeah, so I always think the technical resources really, they are the experts of the software, right? So as you're going through the discovery questions, as you're understanding what the pains are, as you understand what the customer thinks the requirements are, they're sitting there listening and understanding, all right, which one of these requirements can I highlight the best? Which one of these things do I not do well? How do I shape the requirements to align them more with what my product can do, right? So I think those are some of the differences there, is you're constantly trying to figure out, because there will be weaknesses that you don't want to highlight. You want to gloss over and move past. There are things that you do really well that you want to spend a lot of time on as you start talking into, if you're going to move into some form of a demo POV, thing of that nature, you're trying to identify the things that you can do well and highlight. As you start looking at a set of requirements, when you start talking about the weighting of requirements, how do I shift those weights to be to my advantage? And I think these are generally the things that the technical role will understand better than the general seller role.
Yeah, I think just to kind of paraphrase that a little bit, we start with, no matter what, we're answering customer questions. We'll talk about this later on communication. So we're answering whatever the customer's asking us, we're answering that. But I always think that the technical resources so there's not like a manipulation of, they ask me a question, I tell them something different. It's like, we're thinking on the technical side, we're thinking kind of the end game. Really, both the seller and the technical resources have to be thinking about the end game. But if nobody's thinking about it, then we get into trouble. So you're basically saying that, at the end, I like to say technical resources, I like to hold them accountable for, we should be refining technical decision criteria into something that we can win. And it's also good for the customer. And at the end of the day, the technical resource for me is kind of like that last bastion of hope. Like, if nobody's doing it, then we're in trouble. Then stop me when you see something you like. But the technical resource has to make sure that that's the area we're moving in.
Yeah, no, I agree. So if you're lucky enough to be, early to the game and you're able to drop your own lockout document, your requirements document, your RFP document, then you're in good shape, right? You've now set the stage. If you're unlucky and you're not early in and someone else is in there, then it's all about trying to manipulate or enhance those requirements to your advantage. So, when you get into like these criteria, right, when you think about the weightings of it, if things are weighted, obviously the competitor is going to weight toward the things that they do really well and try to shift the customer's mindset that this is what you really need. That might not be my strength. So how do I change the weightings, alter those weightings? I think a good set of discovery questions and a good set of conversations with the client is maybe I uncover other things that are actually my competitive advantage, right? So, things, or the right questions might uncover new aspects that the customer was not considering that are actually now important, which is going to help you grow the deal. And so now I can get those items included into the requirements. But I think in any instances, you're trying to maybe minimize the competitor's advantage. Obviously, to your point, you're trying to maximize our advantage by ensuring that whatever I have to do to prove to you that my solution is going to be the right solution to solve that pain, that I maximize my opportunity for the win. Absolutely maximize my opportunity for the win.
Yeah,
I also
Johnny.
think that, I think that, like I'm imagining that I'm in the room with Keith, let's say right now, and there's 10 people in the room and we're going over a demo. So we've done some discovery. We've done a little bit of scoping. I've informed Keith of what the pains are for the customer. He's trying now to align our differentiators to those pains, so he knows exactly what to demonstrate. He's not going to demonstrate the product for 5 hours because they don't have 5 hours and we don't have 5 hours. He's going to efficiently demonstrate the product to align to the customer's pain points. And what our end game is Keith is helping me find and build a technical champion. And what I'm in charge of is reading the room, reading the politics. Who is the potential enemy in the room? Meaning somebody that wants the competition but doesn't want us. Maybe they're biased already. Maybe their brother-in-law or son-in-law or something works at the competitive company. And then I'm looking for who could be the champion, who doesn't care, who could be the potential economic buyer. My job, though, is to try to find and build the business champion and help read that room and guide along with Keith, because we've been working together for a while. He knows my facial expressions, when I look at him a certain way, that we should be quiet about this or we should expand on a certain topic, because now we're really one in the same, but we're both driving for different things. Like I'm driving for the politics and the business champion. He's driving for the technical expertise and the technical champion.
Yeah, for me, go ahead, Keith. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that works both ways, right? To your point, right? So done well, the work that the seller has done will set the technical resource up for success. Vice versa, to your point, is watching my facial expressions as well as you're stepping into a landmine. We shouldn't go down that pathway. Or if we do, I'm going to gloss over that because I don't think that's an opportunity for us. I think the other risk is too, as you pointed out, John, which is understanding what do we need to demonstrate to the client that's going to help them solve that problem. I also don't necessarily like the idea of just throwing everything at them, right? Because you don't know yet who's in the room necessarily all the time, or someone new gets introduced in, and I'm out there just throwing, features at the wall to see what sticks. And then we expose a weakness. We expose something that the detractor can latch onto and say, see, I told you this is no better than what we have today. So I think it works both ways there as well.
So
and along those lines, I think when we together understand the customer's use case so well that we're both able to open up and ask more open-ended discovery questions, even during the demonstration, that can pull out more information. And if we're not getting the information, but Keith is so familiar with the product and he's so familiar with the use case that he knows that anybody with this use case has a specific pain that they're not talking about yet. That's where he could show a certain capability of the product and pull that out of the customers, because then all of a sudden they say, oh my gosh, yeah, we need that. Why? Well, then now it's my job to understand, well, why do you need that? And now Keith and I are both asking questions at the same time because we hit on something. Okay, why do you need that? How big of a need is that? How big of a pain is that? How much does that cost you? All that type of stuff. We're now like in unison going after that.
Yeah, I love the discussion that's shaping here, because what it means to me is, like, back in the days when I thought about like the difference between offense and defense, back in my football days, is what I saw, and I was a defender, and what I saw, the greatest offensive players that I played against, they had, like, if you look at an offensive line, the greatest offensive linemen knew what everybody else was doing, because they had to be able to pick up on a dime if something didn't go the right way. So they almost had to switch roles. If I'm a guard and the tackle gets beat, I just kind of slide over, no big deal. And there was like this unison. So the reason why I'm saying this is I think that this gets lost a little bit sometimes with the relationship between the technical resource and the sales resource is incredible. And it starts with preparation. Before we go in, who's doing what when? And when I think about the seller, Johnny, like you said, sellers utilizing discovery to uncover the technical pain. Like you can't tell a customer that's why you don't go in and just do a demo. You go in and ask questions to get a customer to sit in their moment of pain and then implicate that pain, implicate it to the business. Now, when the 100-pound brains like Keith are with me, they can now show very specifically how technically we can connect those two, because those two together have the responsibility to connect technical pain to business pain. I like kind of how you said that, Johnny, but it's that intersection and both of you sit in the middle. And sometimes one's going to have to, if the sales guy isn't doing enough of downstream connecting it to the pain, the technical person has to do that, but where the outcome is and vice versa. But if you don't delineate those responsibilities, then it can be a crap show when you show up in front of a customer, and the customer might say, yeah, well, let's just get started with the demo. And Keith, what would you say if you didn't have a conversation? Let's just say this for both of you guys. No conversation's been had. The customer wants to see a demo. We show up and the customer says, yeah, what's a great outcome look like for it? And the customer says, well, I'd like to see what the product can do. I'd like to hear from both of you. What would you say to the customer?
I say, well, do you have 5 hours? Because to demonstrate our entire product is going to take 5 hours. But if you allow me to just ask you a couple more questions about your use case and your current environment, I might be able to tailor this to like a 20-minute demonstration. Would you allow me to do that?
Love it.
Yeah. I think
and there's nothing, going back to your earlier point, sorry, Keith, is nothing frustrates me more when I was, sales leader, than I go on a sales call with the sales rep and the SE. Sales rep gives a little, tap dance about this company and the product. And then we're going to give the demo and they go sit in the back and check their phone.
Oh, man, no doubt.
That really irritates me.
Because when you think about it, let's say it's Keith and I, when Keith is demonstrating the product, I'm doing all those things. I'm watching the body language. I'm seeing whose eyes. I remember the first time I saw a demonstration of Pro Engineer, and they were telling me about bidirectional associativity. I was like, oh my God, I made a mistake. Like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, because it looked like global find and replace for me in Microsoft Office. And I was thinking, what the heck is this? And then when I saw the CEO of a manufacturing company's jaw dropped when Keith is showing something, I'm like, oh, that means something. Like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, that seemed to impress you. Why? But I wouldn't have seen that if I was just laying back. And I see this, Johnny, it still happens today. It's like they're almost over-rotated on roles and responsibilities. Here's Keith. And then I go away and I sit in the back and I do whatever. That's ludicrous. You have to be watching. And let's talk about some of the nuances, you guys. What have you seen now that we're doing a lot of this over? We're not sitting in a room. What are some of the nuances of being remote?
I think what you lose is you lose the body language, right? Predominantly, right? You don't see what people are really doing, especially if they're sitting off Zoom, right? Off camera. Kind of going back to some of your thoughts earlier, which is, it is it's a surgical relationship in my mind between the technical and the seller, right? They are operating together. They understand their own body language. They understand where to pick up a sentence, where to drop off a sentence. I think to your point is that everybody's got to be paying attention, right? Which is, I don't actually like the over planning, going in with a hardcore plan that says this is exactly what we're going to do, because you never know what you're going to run into when you get into the situation. Right. Who's going to be there, what's going to happen. You've got to be able to rotate. You've got to be able to change course and direction. So you need that flexibility. Second thing is, to your point is, been in a lot of situations where it's just, hey, fire up the machine, let's start doing the demonstration, right? And I have no idea where to go because I have no idea what this customer's interested in. I don't know necessarily yet who's in the room and what's their interest lies and what they're going to do to me. So I think there's disadvantages in that. Setting the stage properly, the best reps I ever worked with set that stage, right? We had conversations, we talked, we understood. We may not even do a demo that day because it might not be necessary to have that demo that day, You might not have the right people in the room. So, you discover that along the way, that the questions are going to decide where you're going to go and which direction you're going to go in. The reps know when I'm in trouble, right? So when I'm in trouble, so if you're in the back of the room and you're not paying attention and something's going sideways on me, how do you recover and pull the attention away from me to give me a few moments to get myself back engaged, to figure out what the problem is and make it look as if that problem's not occurring, right? So it's the old pull the cord out of the machine, let the machine die because it's not working.
We used to do that. We absolutely used to do it. We used to have the SC tie their leg around the power cord. And then if it looked like the software wasn't doing what we wanted to do, especially in the early days, you just pull their leg up and the machine would go down. Oh boy.
I think one of the hardest things for most
had.
teams, I think one of the hardest things for most teams is just that ability to be flexible and rotate, right? Because, if the room dynamics change, if the line of questioning changes, how do I shift my conversation or my presentation to align to now what's interesting? Or if that's a trap and I'm moving into an area that I am not going to succeed, how do I gloss over that and get past that particular issue? That's it's a talent, and it's a team talent there, which is to work together to move past something that's going to put us in a bad light, or we see as a trap that's being set either by a distractor in the room or the competitor's been in there ahead of us and set the trap.
I think, Johnny, with Zoom, it's harder to, like Keith's point, to read the body language on people and see the reactions from other people. Like if you're really reading the room, you're kind of looking for who the other people are paying attention to and their reaction to what Keith is doing, let's say in the demonstration. And
winks, the nods, the taps on the shoulders, like look at this.
Or somebody says something in a room and nobody reacts. Then somebody says something and everybody's shaking their head like, oh, that's good. But that's really difficult to see on Zoom. So then on Zoom, you have to pay even more attention to specifically what they say and specifically what they ask. Like you have to be so in tune with what they're really asking and how people might be reacting, because you're almost like using your intuition as to how people are, what they're really saying and how they're really reacting.
The other hint sometimes is when they've got their audio on and you hear the Slack messages dinging or the Teams messages dinging between them, right? So it's an indicator of what's going on, right? Is that now you got to decide whether these are good dings or bad dings as they're communicating over Slack with one another. So you don't see what they're, you don't see the body language and the whispers now. It's the Slack messages in the background.
I love this topic because Zoom for me, like I can see, like I can get in there and I can see. I wouldn't do a demonstration if I was like one person's in a room and they're huddled around something and they're like, I wouldn't do it that way. I would make sure that everybody, and set it up, I would make sure that everybody has access to a screen, that you can see everybody's faces, you're sharing the information. I find that Zoom today for me, I can see what they're doing. I can stare at them and they don't know I'm staring at them. I can tell if they're typing and doing other things I have no problem, like when there's dinging going off or something like that, I have no problem with saying, hey, let's just do a check here. How we doing? And go around to everybody and just say, hey, 2 things you like about what we're doing right now and 2 things that could go differently or what have you. But I think that there's obviously advantages and disadvantages to both environments, but you can make the best out of any environment that you're in. You can do the John McMahon stare on somebody and they don't even know you're staring at them. You can highlight them in a screen and see exactly what their body language is. Hey, last thing before we kind of move off, I want to give you guys a perspective. So I got hired to PTC. I wasn't an engineer. I had never sold software before. And McMahon, in his infinite wisdom, hired me to lead people that were sellers that had sold, and some of them were engineers. They had sold software before. So my disadvantage in the beginning was I had no idea what was going on technically. And I actually had to turn that into an advantage. I loved going into demos because on the way to the demo, and I did a lot with Keith back in the day, I would ask like, okay, what are some of the things, they're doing sheet metal here. Like, what are some of the things I need to understand about problems and challenges and where are the typical problems, Keith? So I was great at discovery because that's what Xerox had taught me. But Keith would help me. He'd say, okay, what we should do is we should find out, like, go do a plant tour and find out. I mean, you might have taught me in the beginning, you were Kurt. So let's go and find out where all that scrap is and then go ask them about scrap and why is that happening? And so I just want to encourage new people. You're not like at the mercy of the situation. I knew that I was really good at asking discovery questions. And so I would work with Keith and people like Keith to say, okay, what's a great kind of rhythm? We're going to talk about this in a second. We talk about sales process. But they taught me just, hey, John, just ask them, tell me about your design through manufacturing process right now. Like, tell me about your current process. And then you can ask them about where are some of your biggest challenges or bottlenecks. And I knew, well, I got to find out the business implication of that. Okay, so how often does that happen? Who cares about that? What's the impact to the customer? And the way that the technical resources kind of helped me understand that, and then I would learn. I knew Keith's body language. So if Keith was looking stressed when they were asking him something, after the demo, would I say, hey, Keith, like when we got into that, like you looked like, and he'd say, yeah, like what they were asking me to do. And then I would say, well, how do we make sure that we put ourselves in a better position? So that was one of the best ways that I could learn was by watching the technical resources interact with the customer. I knew what my role was, plain and simple. I have to ask discovery questions to uncover pain. You have to learn how to do that if you're a seller. I had to link technical pain to business outcomes. I had to continuously qualify the opportunity. Who cares about this? If you guys were to purchase something like this, who would that be? Why are they not in the room? How would we get them in the room type stuff? And then figure out kind of how to leverage champions. That was my responsibility, knowing if I knew nothing about the software, whatever, that's what I know I have to go on there doing from a sales side. But it's a great opportunity to learn. Because when it gets down to the technical, if you don't understand the technical, you can't connect it to the business. And for the technical people, if your team does not understand the business, you're never going to be able to create to connect the technical to the business. And that's just the rule of the jungle today. If you don't do that, if you don't have those intersections of technical getting connected to business, you're screwed. No matter what you're selling.
I think that works both ways, right? So if you think about, how these two people come together, right? A technical person and a seller. If you look back at their history, what they did through their life forms who they are today, and it creates these focus areas, right? So, I did certain things growing up. I attended certain extracurricular activities. I went to certain schools to get certain educations, and it forms and focuses a set of skills. The seller may be coming from a very different direction. So as we come together, right, I think, first with the customer, I think most customers are genuinely interested in sharing with you what they do. Many are very proud about what their companies do and the impacts they have on people and their customers. And so, the old days of plant tours or just tell me about the business, tell me about what you guys do, how you impact your customers, they're generally willing to open that up, and it gives you an opportunity to learn. As new sellers would come in, I think the benefit is run around with as many different of the SEs that you can to understand how they operate and see the different points that they have and how they uncover needs and how they demonstrate benefits and how the software is going to change how they do their jobs and improve their lives essentially. Flip side of it is generally most of the SEs and the consultants generally have longer tenures with the company. They've got the scars of past POVs and benchmarks. And so, they come with this wealth of information that you can leverage, to help you better understand what questions to ask, identify that customer pain point as being, oh, that's a good one. I'm glad he said that or she said that because that's in my wheelhouse. Also where to stay away. I think from the technical resources perspective is we don't come with all this good discovery question capability and open-ended questions. We're used to black, white, yes, no. There's a one mathematical answer to this question, but there really isn't. There's lots of answers to these questions. There's lots of shades of gray. And so I think they're both learning off of one another. And when I bring new people in, I say the first thing is at least in my world now in consulting, your first job is go sit down with your sellers, go introduce yourself, and get into as many meetings, as many demos, as many things you can to learn how that person operates, their line of questioning, what they do, how they do it, because it actually will make you a better technical person in the end.
Yeah, and to Keith's point, I think with the SEs, which are normally have more tenure with the company, it's really important for the sales leaders to understand what their view of the world is, what their view of how we're doing in these demos and POCs, and how each of the different reps are with respect to knowledge and their skill set in front of customers. It's a good way to triangulate what you think with what the SEs think and what the sales rep themselves think, and try to figure out what the truth is.
Yeah, another one for sales leadership for me is I figured this out. First thing I figured out was the dynamic in the room, and that was great learning for me. The next thing I figured out is, since I was managing both these resources, I was like, this has to be orchestrated from a higher level to make sure that, and so I was really kind of, for the first time, introduced to the importance of sales process. Like, there is a process and it really helped me understand, like, how does the customer buy what we're selling? And so once I understand how important, like in our case, it was so important to show the software. So I had to understand what has to take place before, during, and after. And so, and we I think we did a really, really good job over time of really kind of nailing that at PTC, because, like, if you're listening to this now and you're like a startup company, it's a wonderful place to start. How does this customer buy our stuff? If they don't buy it yet, how would they buy it? Like, whatever problem we're solving, how do they solve this problem? And when you start there, then you can make sure that you have the right people doing the right things at the right time, because we're not even talking about that yet. I'd like to move into that, like where sales process comes into this, and then timing of doing these activities. What has been your guys' experience with that?
I think on the timing of it is through the process, one of the things is, like, where does the technical resource come in, right? So I always think the earlier the better. And obviously, what type of product are you selling impacts it as well, right? When we were in the days of PTC, we had something super new and people were super excited about it. It was very easy to jazz people up. It didn't take a lot, but it was also a paradigm shift. They were really going to have to rethink how their world operates, right? They were on paper, we're bringing them into 3D. We're completely changing how they operate. There's the other end of the spectrum where I kind of sit today, which is a more, hardened industry. It's, there's a lot of similarities. And so how do you differentiate yourself? And so, at what point in time does that technical resource come in to help you move and advance that sale to the next step? What are the techniques that you're going to use? They're very different between something that's brand new, like AI is today, and how transformative it's going to be, as opposed to what do I need to do to actually advance a sale in sort of a hardened industry. I actually think, in general, just upfront, the earliest you can get not only the sales engineers, and in today's world of subscription, getting your CSM involved, what's life going to look like after the sale, what's the success plan going to look like, get the services folks in, because what are we going to need to do to actually develop a solution for this client, propose a solution up front, right? So, one of the critical things, I think, is just get those people in early in the process, help you shape the requirements, help you shape what the deal's going to look like as it goes through negotiation. What's the end going to look like through an implementation, that full end-to-end program.
Johnny, you're the author of The Qualified Sales Leader. It's an unbelievable book. If you haven't read it out there, folks, I can't believe anybody listening to this that hasn't read it. If you haven't read it, read it again. But Johnny, you really did a great job at PTC, in my opinion, of getting us focused on the end game and then really making us think about the process. I remember when I interviewed with you in the Denny's, you had like stages, and there was like 4 or 5 simple stages. And I basically said, so that's it. So you tell me if I follow these stages that I'll be successful. You said 100%. I'm telling you that. And I'm telling you, if you don't follow the stages, you won't you won't be successful at PTC.
Right.
It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a threat. It was just like, that's how. And then when I got here, when I got to PTC, it was real. Like, so let's talk about qualification and why that's so important in what we're talking about, because this can go awry when we are unqualified and doing a lot of technical work.
Where are you in the sales process when you want to talk about qualifying right now? Where are you?
I would say that's kind of like a hypothetical. It's like, where are you? Like, whatever your sales process is, you need to know where you are. Like, somebody says they want to see the technology. What are some of the things that we would say, Johnny? Like, in order to do that, what would you expect to be in place generally in a process?
Big discovery. I mean, if you don't really, which is really what we've been touching on for a while now, if you don't really do a good job in the discovery process, it's really hard to set yourself up and the SE up for a really good demonstration or presentation of what your product does and doesn't do. And the way that sometimes, you know, as a sales rep, I can ask these questions, especially if I understand the use case and the pains that are in that use case, and understand the personas that we're selling to and how they're measured. Where my SE can really help me, and I've seen this happen, is they know what the product can do and can't do, and they know how to align those differentiators to the pains. But sometimes you're still trying to extract, even when you get into the demonstration stage, they're still trying to extract more pains from the customer. And a lot of customers believe that, this is my experience, even selling, you know, 5 different products. They think they're the only ones with that problem. So they clamor up on certain things that they know is a problem, but they don't really want to share, because they feel like when they're sharing it to some sales rep in SE that just showed up, they're sharing it to the outside world. So they're kind of quiet about that. And I've always liked it when my SE could say, you know, when I was in your shoes, because they have the domain knowledge, whether they really were in those shoes or weren't in those shoes, but they know the product so well, they could say, look, when I was in your shoes and in that job, here's one of the things that was a pain for me in this use case. And here's what this product does. Let me show you this. And they get really excited. And then the customer now starts to open up, because they realize, wow, first of all, they showed me 3 things that I didn't even know that I could do that could solve these pains. Now they're showing, they've done this for other customers, and this person that's doing the demonstration truly understands what I live through every day, and they're starting to show me stuff that they know I have problems with. Now they start to open up, and I always loved when that happened in the interaction between me, the SE, and the customer.
Let me give you another aspect of that. So, you know, as part of the qualification process, right, is do we have access to, you know, do we have a champion?
Let's go. This is where I want to go right here.
Yeah.
Let's go.
All right. So, because here's where it gets hard, right? So you gain traction, but do you have a champion who's going to help you push this thing through the next step I'm going to talk about, which is where it gets scary. And the economic buyer, right? Do we have money? Do we have someone who's willing to go spend on this? Because what's going to happen now is you start to uncover all this pain and you start to show them what your technology can do, then they start to think, oh man, I actually got to do this. I have a day job. I'm not going to be able to go bowling tonight or go out and do this because now I got to go do this implementation. And they start pushing back and saying, yeah, but that's not how we do it here, right? We do it this way. And you're like, yeah, but this technology, you don't need to do that anymore. This technology is going to skip over that step. You're going to get to the end result faster. It's going to be easier. You're going to be able to sell more of these things. And so you now start to get a little bit of the user fear, right? The fear comes in as, okay, this is getting real. This product really looks good. It looks like it's going to solve a lot of my problems, but I have to change processes. I have to go implement this technology. I have to migrate all the data from the existing technology. And so the technical users actually start to get, you know, sort of the concrete feet, right? They're scared and they're nervous, right? So now this is where the champion can push back through that. Look, you know, the end result is going to be far better. We're going to have some time and some pain moving from one technology to the next, but we're going to eliminate all this work. It's going to make your life easier. I think that's the thing that you got to be prepared for. If you don't have those people who will push through the user's fears, because they're going to give you every reason why maybe we shouldn't do this now.
So good. So good. And for me, like, I'm so excited about this conversation right here because, like, even the technical people, I find, and I don't want to, this is not it's not a stereotype. I want to make sure that I'm not going overboard. But you started it, Keith, when you said you got to understand like some of the people you're talking to. Johnny, I know you and we've had this conversation. Like, there's a difference between the way our brains work. You're an engineer and I'm not. And I probably go down a path of change a little bit faster than you do with no real plan and not understanding how it's going to kind of all fit together. And we've talked about that, how that kind of drives you nuts a little bit. But
I've seen that. Yeah.
yes,
Almost
but
like when you're docking a boat.
yes, we're going to dock the boat.
Pretty bad.
Yes. Yeah, so I want to talk about this. That's why this is so important. There's so much to talk about here. But when, like back at PTC, we had like this user fear. If we stayed in that user fear, we would have never have convinced engineers to move from paper drawings to digital CAD models. We never would have done that. It never would have happened. And I saw that immediately, like there was this resistance. So I knew that there was always this connection between, there's got to be somebody who cares. Somebody's telling me we don't do it that way, but somebody cares that we can get it done in 50% of the time. And that, like, if you don't have that built into your sales process, okay, so like right now we're talking to people who care about how things get done and the changes to things get done. Where is the person who cares about working through the changes to what's the outcome for the business? And that has to get built into a sales process.
That's where you have to constantly be aware as a salesperson as to who am I speaking to? How are they measured? And now I have to change my language to appropriately speak to how they're measured. So to your point, like if I'm speaking to the engineers, maybe I'm only talking about, differentiators and some features and some functions and some capabilities that are going to help them do their job better. But if they still can't see the light, I have to find somebody that's measured on time to market, engineering productivity, costs of the product, time to market, all those types of things. But then I have to speak in that language too. I can't start speaking in, CAD language or features and functions or any of that stuff. And that's where a lot of salespeople go awry. They have this, if there's 5 people in the room, they're speaking one language. They don't change their language based upon, who's in the room and how those people are measured. And that's a big problem.
I love it. And you get delegated to who you sound like, and people use that as a negative. They're like, well, you get delegated who you sound like. So you got to make sure, like you're saying, Johnny, I like it. You got to make sure you're talking to the right people. But I like that knowledge. I like to ask questions that I know people will not be comfortable asking. And then just sitting with it in the room, they know it's a good question, but we know that the right person is not in the room. And it kind of opens up the path that we have to go farther in this conversation. And I always like to bring the technical people with me if I could. I'd say like, hey, wouldn't you like to know the answer to this question? Because then it was easier for me to maneuver around in a company. But bottom line is, you have to know who you're talking to, what they care about, how they're measured. And you also have to know what probably is not in the room or what probably is not in the current conversation. And where I started this conversation is when you have a good sales process, it tells you what you're missing. And you don't proceed with certain things before you get the rest of the information. That's kind of where I was going. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah. Well, remember when we used to call on, you would think when you're selling computer-aided design software, because that's what we're talking about. So then you go to a company and they have the director of computer-aided design. So wouldn't I, as a sales rep, go talk to the director of computer-aided design? But after you talk to their users and they got all excited, and then you went to talk to the director of computer-aided design and you were telling them how fast you could get this thing to market and engineering productivity and everything, and they're shrugging their shoulders, or they're telling you that in 6 months their current CAD vendor is going to leapfrog you and have the same thing that you already have, right? You realize I'm speaking to the wrong person. This language that I'm using is not resonating with them. So I'm obviously speaking to the wrong person. I got to get even higher in the organization.
Yeah,
And my language has to resonate, with the people that I'm speaking to.
At that level, that person's more worried about today, the disruption to their personal life and the benefit
Yes.
to the corporation.
Well, they're going
That's
home to your point, Keith, they're going home at 5:00. If I sell them a CAD system for 100 engineers, he's not going home at 5:00 anymore. He has to do an implementation for 100 engineers. That's going to take away from him going home at 5:00 and going bowling at 6:00.
It is. It's so it's in those days at PTC, right? It was trying to get people past the everything was in two dimensions. It was drawings, and now you're telling them that, hey, I'm going to have this thing called a three-dimensional model, and it's got this thing called associativity. And if I make one change, the drawing changes and the tooling changes and everything changes, and it's all automatic. But the users get into the thing of, but the drawing is what I do today. And you're not really good at drawing. You lost the big picture. The big picture is I change in one place, it changes everywhere. It saves everybody lots of work. In my world today, the business I run today, we're on our second professional services automation tool, as they call it. And the idea for me is how do I generate more and more revenue per resource manager per year and eliminate manual steps? That's the goal, right? What everybody does all day long, it's all about me, is for automation, get into the end result. And right. And so to your point is as we implement these new technologies, everybody's like, well, I kind of like the way I do it today. And there's certain people in the organization who like spreadsheets and they want to do this way. That's not going to get us to the end result, right? So if I'm at $1 million of revenue per resource manager today, and my goal is 5 million, I've got to make leapfrog changes in how I do things. And so I have to drive the organization and tell the organization, we're going to make radical changes in order to achieve that goal, because the business is just not going to keep giving me headcount every year. This is where the economic buyer, the champion, comes in. Is I've got bigger visions of what we're going to do, not just these little small incremental changes.
Right. A lot of times when users are faced with automation, they immediately think, oh my gosh, you're going to put me out of a job. And the reality is when you get up to the top, they say, look, I'm not cutting my people. They might be able to just do a lot more with your tool. And that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. But they look at it and go, oh my gosh, this thing's so amazing. It's going to put me out of a job. So I'm going to try to fight it.
I've changed it over to effective headcount, right? So it's, if I'm going to drive from 1 million per person to 5 million per person, the effective headcount is adding 10 people to the team that I don't have to add in the future. It's not that I'm going to lose people, but just I'm going to avoid, future headcount hiring in the future. Because rarely do we ever go and get rid of 50 people. We don't.
They're not going to cut people. Yeah, no, it's cost avoidance.
So the bow on this one is, and I remember I used to work for some people back in the day that would tell me, hey, stay out of engineering. Don't call in there. Call. And I remember vividly when I went and sold technology to a CEO, the CEO loved what we were doing, loved what we could do for the company. And he said, unless those engineers tell me that this is the tool they want to use, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me on this subject, where a person said, I love this. Like, you guys did such a great job. But if my engineers don't tell me, I'm not going to tell them what tool to use. I'll ask them why the heck they didn't pick you guys. And it was a great understanding for me. This is the whole topic. Well, no matter what you're selling, you have to tie technical to business. You have to do it. You can't run away from engineers. You can't. And now let's talk about PLG. So now we're people listening to this and they're saying, hey, we're product-led growth. And we're being told, just do the demo, do the demo, do the demo. And so what advice would you give people here that are saying, I got to do the demo. I got to show the product. I got to give away the product right away. And, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. How do sales process, discovery questions, what about all that when I'm being told I got to show the product right away? What do we do?
A lot of times that PLG is, in a lot of organizations, it's really just a qualified lead, and allows an enterprise salesperson to get in, talk to those people, and maybe get higher and wider in the organization. But there are some organizations that sell really low, for small amounts of money, and they just sell through PLG. And I think we even had a guy on the podcast that talked about the PLG trap. Eventually they get to a certain
We got to go
level as far
enterprise.
as revenue, and they realize, hey, we got to hire enterprise salespeople, and their model's not built for enterprise salespeople, and the whole company kind of breaks. But in most well-run organizations, you take a Snowflake, a MongoDB, some of those companies, they basically have a PLG function, and it serves mainly as a great qualified technical lead for the enterprise salespeople.
So it satisfies user technical requirements.
Yeah.
Right.
Perhaps more for expansion than initial landing, I would think. Everybody's talking about it. To your point is, and maybe coming back to the earlier point on the linking to the technical people. And the technical people got it could be a huge, decision maker. To your point is in terms of whether you're going to do this or not. And I think for them, it's all around, this is where the sales engineer really comes in. Because one thing I always say, the sales guy's going to tell you it's going to take a day. The sales engineer is going to say it's going to take 3 days. And the project manager is going to say it's going to take a year. And then so somewhere in the middle is how long it's going to take this customer to fully understand and get full advantage of this software. And so this is where it's critical for the sales engineers to help paint what that future is going to look like. But at the same time, realizes that, hey, it's not necessarily the easiest thing. This customer's got to change. They've got to adopt to how my software works to get full advantage of it. This is where I think, painting the vision of what customer success does today in this world, right? Customer success has got a huge function in driving the onboard and adoption for that client. Professional services has a role in this. And so how do I get that customer maximize that software purchase as fast as they possibly can? You've got to paint that for that user on the other side, right? Because they realize it's going to take a bunch of work, but they feel that this sales engineer understands my problem. To your point, John, I've been there before. I've done this. This is what it's going to look like. My people on the back end, these success people and these professional services folks are going to get you there. That is a part of the solution as well, which is just not the software, but it's the how I get there. And that's got to be included in the deal. It's got to be as a package. It's got to be as a whole. And then I think to your point on the product-led growth, right? Everybody's doing this now, which is the hints and the nudges in the software, trying to get the customer to, explore new aspects of it, to expand their license consumption. I suspect it's going to still come back out to the field for the customer to truly understand how to, take advantage of that capability and how it fits into their objectives. I'm not sure that you'll just nudge them and they'll just go do it. Not sure.
Awesome. And I think, guys, to sum this part up on sales process, if you're listening and you do not have a sales process that is aligned to the way your customer buys, that has some type of how the customer forms their decision criteria, how we influence that decision criteria, how we get the right people involved, how we, move it to procuring that solution. If you don't have that mapped out, I don't care if you're a startup, that's when you're doing it. You'll never scale. If you don't, that's what I really loved about what I saw at PTC, is that they did such a good job of who's doing what, when, in what stage, because if you don't, you're going to wear the 100-pound brains out. And I remember, I remember Keith calling me and saying, why are we going to go do this benchmark? We're going to lose. This benchmark is not set up correctly. And if your process allows for things like that to happen, you're never going to scale. So we have to we're talking about kind of critical aspects of the differentiation, delineation of the two types of individuals that are technical and sellers. Now we talked a little bit about sales process, this shaping customer. You said something to me in our prep, Keith, shaping customer objectives and managing technical expectations. Like, I didn't want to blow over that. Like, that's an art. Like, and I'm saying we're listening to the customer, but we're influencing it to make it better for the customer in a way, not telling them the wrong. Like, and you eloquently said, you're shaping customer objectives and managing technical expectations. What did you mean by that? Because that seemed like an art to me.
Yeah, I think it's coming back to what you said before, right? Which is, the technical folks on the team are a valuable asset. They're a scarce asset at times, right? So qualifying the customer appropriately, making sure you've got the right, decision criteria. To what extent did we shape that criteria so that it best suits, our software and what we can bring to the table for the client? allows you to better utilize that resource. So for example, in our company today, right, you don't do a POV without a medtech review, right? We have to decide whether or not you've done all the right things in order to put this technical resource there. Also, when we do a proof of value we want to make sure that, there's a high chance of success, and we do have a high chance of success here, right? When it's all done right, when the process is done right, we followed it, we've ensured that we've, shaped it, we've influenced the requirements, they've got the right weighting on the requirements. We're crystal clear about, if we do this, this will solve your pain that you will purchase. Those are all the things that you're doing to shape it, right? And the technical resource can certainly help you with all that. I think they're critical in that.
Yeah.
Well, this goes back to like what Keith was saying before, when, why are you going to do this POV? We're not ready for it. It's always when somebody skips steps in the sales process. Going back to what you said, Cap, about us being in the Denny's, and I'm saying, if you follow these steps, you'll be successful. If you don't, which really means you skip steps, you're going to fail, right? And that's why Keith and his current company do a MedPick review before the POV. Essentially, they're seeing whether or not you skip steps. Because anytime you lose a deal, you could go back to where the sales rep skipped a step or didn't do the step the right way, didn't get the right information, skipped over people, those types of things. It almost always goes back to skipping steps.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You asked this question the other day, right? Which is, I don't think you see as much of a one-to-one anymore. So not necessarily as a seller do you have a dedicated person, right? So you're borrowing from a pool. In that pool is, everybody's running on this 90-day sprint. Is what's my best chance as a sales leader to get to the finish line? How do I impart that authority upon my technical leadership to make good decisions, to put the technical people in the right place for the right opportunity with the greatest likelihood that we're going to close in the period that we need it to. So there's rigor there, to your point. And so you want to set up the technical resources for success. There's nothing worse than going into a POV or a benchmark or whatever it is and getting your teeth kicked in on a regular basis because we didn't set it up right. We're in there trying to beat the competitor's RFP document, their lockout document, not our lockout document. It's demoralizing. So bad sellers will burn out good technical people. Good sellers will basically grow and build better technical people, in my mind.
Yeah.
If you're trying to respond to an RFP that you didn't write, it means the competition wrote it. The criteria is already set against you. That's just wasting time and wasting resources.
Yeah, you generally know what you're good at and what you're not good at, right? I think even in the set up incorrectly, you can still win. It's just much harder because, someone's accepted that as the criteria. Someone probably wants that to be the criteria. Makes it harder for you to shift it in your direction to get the customer focused on a bigger picture as opposed to
it means the competition has a champion. You don't.
Yeah, exactly.
You just responded to an RFP. You have no champion. You don't know what you know what the criteria is. It's written in the RFP and it's written for the competition. You have no chance of doing more discovery to understand more pains and how your differentiators can solve those and getting those into the RFP before you do the POV. You're just set up to lose. It's a waste of time.
There's an overriding, what we talk about a lot on this podcast is why buy anything? Why buy anything now? And why buy anything from me? And the next step is, so that's your differentiation. That's putting technical problems to business outcomes in a highly differentiated way. Now, if you're a company listening to this and you don't have it, I'm really pressing hard on this. Sorry, I keep repeating myself, but I see a lot of great technologies that have technical founders that really don't understand sales and sales process. And they're just like, the technology is so great. Just go out there, show the product, show the product, show the product. And I always see the same results, is that if it's not done in a qualified, purposeful way, you will never scale a company. So like somebody says, okay, show the product. What do we have to have in place to show the product? Well, no, we're going to show the product early to get technical understanding, technical concern, technical feedback, or what have you. Okay, that's fine. But what's the next step in the process? And so it's just the importance of mapping those two together. And I think that's one of the things, Johnny, I watched you do in 5 different companies, and you knew what the end game was, and you were and that's how you resource a company. Okay, so how many Keith Textors do we need? How many 100-pound brains do we need? How many opportunities do we have in these types of stages? Why are we stalling? I mean, we did everything off those stages. So it's critically important. Hey, I don't want to end this thing today without talking about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room for me was always, this was a hard one for me. So like when I first started, I'm like, these 100-pound brains, the Keith Textors of the world, are so freaking phenomenal. And they don't make the same as the sellers. And so there's like this compensation, and this just became like an elephant in the room for me that I had to figure out really quick. And I'd like to talk about this, like recognizing and rewarding technical contributions purposely and effectively inside an organization. Keith, I want you to just kind of talk about it first, and then Johnny, how did you handle it? So Keith, there's an elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, no, everybody, it's, that goes 2 ways, right? Which is, number one is there are these distinct roles. The technical resource plays a very large role in it. So multiple people on the team, right? Account teams are large teams consisting of many different people who play different roles in trying to, to get to the win. With that, then, is I think they all should be, their contribution should be recognized. So many companies have all these, various different techniques for sending out wins, right? And notifying the company that, hey, we just won this big account. Here's what happened. And in my mind, everybody who contributed should be on there, regardless of the level of contribution. Because in the end, just a simple calling out of the name, this person from the sales engineering team, this person on the legal team, this person in the consulting team, this person in the CSM team, they all contributed to it. I think the simple just, recognizing that they were there, they participated is huge. People love to see their name called out. I think it can be just as simple as that much of the time.
Sometimes, but like you, if I gave that explanation to you back in the days at PTC, you would have laughed me out of the room, because you and I had those conversations. I'll talk a little bit deeper about that in just a second. Johnny, what about the elephant in the room?
Well, I think there's two things here. One is how you can recognize. One is recognition. 2 is stock. So I used to, find a way to get the most valuable SEs, get them more stock in the company, and get them a lot of recognition. Where what happens a lot of times is SEs don't see all the work that went into when they come into the deal. Like they may come in at the demonstration stage or even the POC stage. And when you really back up, there's really 2 things. There's skills and then there's knowledge. So the SEs have tremendous domain experience, so tremendous knowledge of the domain and of the product. And what they don't see is the skill set that's required to do pipeline generation, have the phone hung up on you 100 times to go get one demonstration, or one time you can get in the door. Do proper discovery process. I'm talking about really good, sales reps. Do proper scoping. Get a champion, get to the economic buyer. Do all those things requires a different type of skill set than most of the SEs that I've run into have, or even want to try to obtain. So it's not that they don't understand the sales game and the sales steps, and it's not that they don't understand the knowledge of the product. It's that they don't have, and sometimes are not willing to go through mastering the skills that are required to get that deal to a certain stage and then actually close it after the SE is left. The other thing is, as Keith has pointed out, and you have too, is a lot of times, especially these days, you have an SE that might get compensated on multiple sales reps, whereas the sales rep gets compensated on themselves. I sell, and guess what? They're not firing a lot of SEs, but they're firing a lot of sales reps. When you don't make your number after 90 days, they're not going after the SEs. They're going after the reps and the leaders. So yeah, there's pluses and minuses to both of them. But I think overall to reward the SEs that are doing a great job in helping to pull the company, it's got to be extra stock, extra compensation, and extra recognition for what they do.
I think it's you're right. You said recognition, but there's pay involved in it too, right? So there's two different things, which is, do I feel like I'm adequately compensated for the role that I play, right?
Right.
I think as you said, John, right?
I said comp, stock, and recognition. Yeah.
At breakfast, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed, right? The rep is committed. He or she is the one that generally gets let go because the numbers aren't there.
Right.
The other thing that I always tell people, which is kind of like the Nick Saban thing, right? Which is, do your job, focus on your job, do the right things, and the outcomes will occur. And it kind of comes in with there's an aspect here in the seller and this technical relationship. I don't want to diminish the technical relationship or the technical person, but to your point, the rep has, entered the game. The rep has progressed the game. The rep has put the ball, on the goal line. The rep has, is preparing to score. The technical resource comes in and kicks the field goal, right? We have a specific task. There's so much that happened before you got there that you didn't necessarily see. You didn't go through all that work with the rep. The rep has to bring it over the finish line. And so there's a lot more there. And I think you realize that after you're in the game for a while. It took a couple of years even for me to realize, wow, what these people do is a tremendous amount of work. They are, to your point, they are accountable. I'm responsible for an activity, but they're accountable for the deal. They're accountable for the revenue that they have to bring in, and I'm not. And so you learn that after a while. And to your point, you made a couple other comments in there, which is, my past experiences focus my skills on a narrower set of talents than many of these sellers have. And I had to reflect on that and say, do I feel like I can do all those things that they do? And I said, no, I'm better at, demonstrating to a client they're going to get value from this software. And I'm just going to do that as best as I possibly can because I appreciate and respect what that seller does.
Yeah.
And so, bring it all together, right? There's recognition is, did I play a part in winning this deal? Did I kick the field goal? Yes or no? Let me at least, give me that contribution. I think on the financial side is, yes, there's a lot of different ways that you can, compensate this, the technical people. I think where it might be getting tougher nowadays is they're getting pulled together. There was always a risk reward there too. You're running with the best seller of the team and you're only compensated with them. Your bonuses are huge, but then you got to be cognizant there's going to be bad quarters. And so I'm going to have to take a lower number this quarter. A lot of technical people will fold into, I prefer the pooling. I want to get paid at the area level because I don't like the risk reward. That's differences in personalities too, as well. So, I think the general technical person is, while they want what the seller maybe gets in terms of recognition, financial pay, we tend to go back to the safety spot, which is I would rather get paid at the area level so my pay is more consistent.
Yes.
Let's just be honest. I think a lot of people fall that way too.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the skill set thing. My analogy I always use is like Tom Brady, whether you like him or not, may go down as one of the best quarterbacks that ever played the game of football. His knowledge of the game, no one's going to question his knowledge of the game or how much he studied to gain even more knowledge of the game. You take Tom Brady, put him in any other position on the field in the first play, and everybody's saying, what's he doing in that position? And it's a skill set thing, right? So it's like we talked about. Are you willing to go develop all the other skills that are necessary to go actually sell this product from pipeline generation through discovery, scoping, economic buyer, all the way to close in order to gain the same compensation that some of those really good reps gain? And that's what also people focus on, is they focus on how much like those top reps are making. They're not focused on how many sales reps had exited the business because their skill set wasn't good enough and they failed.
I think this was one of the greatest leadership learning for me is that and it goes back to what I've been harping on, if I didn't have a great defined process of who's doing what, when, and how, then I would not know how to get into this discussion with a technical resource that was saying, hey, what about me? What about my compensation? Once I really locked into that, hey, I have helped technical resources move to sales, and they've done very good jobs because they understood, what am I being asked to do, and will that give me energy? I used to make people just tell me, I'm not asking you whether or not you can do that. I'm asking you whether or not that's going to give you energy. And sellers as well. I've had sellers that have actually gone and become technical people because they were more technical oriented. But in the end, here's what I knew. I had to be open to why. And that always told me, the why always told me what was going on in my organization. I think I might have had the conversation with you, Keith, and I found out that Keith is carrying, this is a true story, I won't mention the name. Keith is all over me on what the seller's not doing. What I realized is I hired the wrong person. And if I listened to him, what he was really telling me was, I'm carrying this dude on my back. You might as well be paying me for it because he's not doing anything. And in this case, I actually had realized I hired the wrong person, and I listened to Keith and I took care of my business, and I moved that person out. And the next person I gave him, he loved, and he still talks about him, says the bestseller that he ever worked with. But this is a leadership thing. If you're leading these organizations, first, if you can't understand what people are doing, how they're doing it, when they're doing it, and then if you can't understand why somebody's bringing up an objection to you, then you're going to miss it. You're going to miss it. A lot of times people aren't saying, hey, I want to do that job. They're saying, I'm not happy with the people that are doing that job, and I'm doing more of their job. I found that's really critical. All right.
I think that's a good point.
Boys, what have we not talked? We covered so much ground today. Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit about the recognition piece. One of the things that I loved was when Keith talked about, hey, being recognized. We had something back at PTC that I still like to do today. I still recommend it in companies. That the best way to get proof points, I found the best way to get proof points, because it's part of the 4 essential questions. What problems do you solve? How specifically do you solve them? How do you solve them differently or better? And where have you done it before? Those are like the 4 essential things of value for any company. And it's always this, where have you done it before, that becomes a problem. What I loved back in the day is when we would encourage the technical people to go back to the companies and get the metrics and get the proof points on what they actually did with it. And then what I would do to support that is I'd go back and I'd create like stock opportunity or compensation opportunity. And I'd tell the sellers, you better go back to that company and say, hey, we want to make sure Keith is our guy, and we want to make sure that he did such a good job on this project. And customers were way more willing to give us proof points, case studies, testimonials when we did it from that angle, versus the seller saying, I want to use it to get more sales. So just listen to that. It's a really good tidbit. And you remember those days, Keith, right? And I hear it from companies today. It drives me nuts. They're like, yeah, customers, they won't give us any proof points. Back at PTC, dude, we had customers' products up on the wall, like they're highly differentiated products up on our wall that they gave us and allowed us to use the drawings for, to show like what they were able to do. And so I'm always hot on that when people say, yeah, we got a discount to get a proof point or whatever. Think about using technical resources to help you get those great technical wins and stories, because technical people love to help technical people. I've always found that as something that's awesome. Is there anything we haven't talked about today, boys, that we should have? Anything we didn't cover?
Got to ask Keith.
Keith?
Yeah, I think, today, I think one of the things, to your point, that last comment there, right, was the reason we had to go back in those days was, that's the days of perpetual software. You own the software, it sits on your servers. I have no idea what you're doing with it after you have it, right? One of the beauties today is with
great point,
in the cloud subscription, telemetry tells us what you're doing, right? So we can actually measure now to what extent did we do a good job up front selling the software based on how we provision the software to the client, because you might have multiple modules, et cetera, that derive the whole solution. And then watching what's the customer doing. So this is going to feed into PLG as well, that you talked about earlier. But how successful were we in getting that client up and running? So there's a sales process, which is, did we sell the right thing in the right proportions in order to set the client up for success? Did our customer success team and our professional services team continue to drive that, onboarding and adoption? And are we setting ourselves up and maximizing ourselves for expansion? So for example, what we're learning today, looking at our telemetry, is the average customer who uses services consumes twice as much of their license capacity as those that do not. We've even found that they push further, and we find out that, in their first year, they progress much faster. And so it kind of all, you can trace this all the way back to the root, which is, did you identify the right pain? Did we sell the right solution?
Great point.
Did we provision it the right way so that the customer can maximize its usage? And then what you want to prevent is when you get to the first renewal and maybe you've made an acquisition, maybe you created a new capability within your software that has a price to it, that you actually have the opportunity to sell it now. So I think the world's changing now because of the telemetry side of it is I don't necessarily have to go ask the questions. I can see what you're doing in the software today.
Great.
Now, how do I use that information to continue to push you and maximize consumption and drive expansion? I think that's a new world for us, and we're starting to see more and more of that.
That's awesome. And tying it to when the job's done right up front with the right technical resources, solving the right problems at the right time, with the right salespeople, connecting it to business outcomes, you're going to get great numbers down the line. So there's a way to kind of keep that reinforcement and that involvement and that credit going for a lot longer than it used to. So that's an awesome point. Hey,
yeah,
dude.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything nowadays that's worse than what is an opportunity to go sell a client something new, and they can simply just repurpose the stuff that they're not using to make that purchase today, right? So, from the start all the way through to the finish, is drive that customer's adoption and maximizing the software. I think is critical for everybody.
Buddy, you're amazing. Thank you for not telling people about voicemails or anything crazy voicemails that I left the region back in the day. He didn't dog me, Johnny. He had some good ones, but he didn't dog me. I just like to summarize this thing. Like, for me, the two greatest things I'm taking out of this is attached to the biggest business issue facing the customer, which is a combination of technical resources and sales resources, and setting the decision criteria in a way that's good for the customer and is heavily, heavily differentiated for us. Like, those are the two things that relationship is responsible for. And you just did such a great job talking about that, Keith. That's so great to see again. You're not aging a freaking day, which is pissing me off. And I'm really, really thankful for you. Congratulations on all your success. You're working with Thurman over there, and know you're in a great environment. It's great to have you. Thanks for taking the time.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I am the tiger, baby. I am the tiger.
Yeah, Johnny, back in the day, I was beating him up on the forecast. I didn't know what else to do. So all I did was I recorded Eye of the Tiger, and I played that so he still remembers it. So I guess it was okay.
Yeah.
Remember, those are the days when you had to dial into the 188 number to get your voicemail every day.
Yeah. Oh, buddy.
Yeah, I love it. I appreciate it. I love working with you.
You've crushed your career, buddy. Proud of you, man.
Excellent. All right, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Keith. And thanks, Cap. And thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.